The fluorescent lights hummed above the Tactical Operations Center as Major Kestrel Voss scribbled notes in the margins of her briefing packet. Around the horseshoe-shaped table, 23 officers leaned forward, studying satellite imagery of the Kythera Peninsula. The room smelled of burnt coffee and nervous sweat. Outside, F-35 Lightning IIs screamed across the dawn sky, their afterburners painting orange streaks against the gray clouds. Colonel Martinez tapped the projection screen with his laser pointer. Intelligence suggests the enemy has established a surface-to-air missile network here, here, and here. Red dots appeared across the mountainous terrain. We need to neutralize these sites before the main assault. The problem is approach vectors. Every route we've mapped puts our aircraft within kill zones. Murmurs rippled through the room. Captain Reynolds, a cocky stick jockey from the 34th Fighter Squadron, smirked. "Sir, we could punch through with a standard SCAD package. Couple of growlers, some wild weasels. Nothing we haven't done before." "Negative," Martinez replied. "These aren't Iraqi conscripts with Soviet hand-me-downs. This is next-generation hardware. Russian S-400s, Chinese HQ-9s. They'll swat our birds out of the sky like flies." Kestrel's pen stopped moving. She studied the topographical lines, the elevation markers, the wind patterns annotated in blue. Her gray eyes traced something the others had missed. A peculiar valley system that snaked between the peaks, invisible to conventional radar mapping, but perfectly visible to someone who understood mountain flying the way a pianist understands keys. "There is another way," she said quietly. The room didn't immediately quiet. Conversations continued in hushed tones until Colonel Martinez raised his hand. "Major Voss." 23 pairs of eyes turned toward her. She felt the familiar weight of skepticism, the subtle eye rolls, the barely concealed sighs. At 34, Kestrel had flown more combat hours than most of the men in this room, but they saw only what they wanted to see. A female pilot who'd somehow slipped through the cracks into their boys' club. "The Serpent's back," she said, standing and moving to the projection screen. "This ridge system here creates a natural corridor. Terrain masking would hide our signature until we're practically on top of the targets." Captain Reynolds snorted. "Ma'am, that's a death trap, the terrain clearance alone." "I've flown it before," Kestrel interrupted. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Colonel Martinez's expression shifted. His eyes narrowed, not with suspicion but with dawning recognition. "What did you say your call sign was, Major?" Kestrel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She'd hoped to avoid this moment, to complete the mission without dredging up ghosts from another war, another life. But here it was, inevitable as gravity. "Ghost Rider," she said. The room fell absolutely silent. The coffee cup in Captain Reynolds' hand stopped halfway to his lips. Lieutenant Colonel Park, the senior intelligence officer, straightened in his chair as if someone had run an electric current through his spine. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Colonel Martinez set down his laser pointer with deliberate care. "Ghost Rider." He repeated the call sign like a prayer, like an incantation from a half-remembered dream, as in Operation Blackwater, Northern Afghanistan, 2019. Kestrel nodded once, a sharp military acknowledgement that contained lifetimes of unspoken stories. Around the table, the younger officers looked confused, but the veterans wore expressions of dawning reverence. They knew the legend, even if they'd never known the pilot behind it. "Jesus Christ," whispered Major Thompson, the mission planner. "You're the one who flew the Kabul extraction, through that storm, in an Apache that should have been grounded for maintenance." The fluorescent lights seemed brighter now, casting everything in stark relief. Kestrel could feel the shift in the room's atmosphere, the way respect crystallized in the air like frost. But with it came the weight of expectation, the burden of living up to a reputation forged in blood and aviation fuel. "That was a long time ago," she said simply. "Not that long," Colonel Martinez replied. His voice carried a different tone now, the automatic deference that career military officers reserved for true legends. The Pentagon still classifies that mission. What I heard through back channels, he shook his head. They said you flew through a Category 5 sandstorm in zero visibility, hostile territory, SAMs lighting up the sky like the 4th of July. Captain Reynolds had gone pale. The wounded Marines, he said, his earlier cockiness evaporated. 27 of them. The hospital ship said they wouldn't have lasted another hour. Kestrel's fingers drummed once against her thigh, a nervous habit she developed during her first combat deployment. She could still feel the cyclic stick in her hands, still hear the screaming wind and the desperate voices on the radio. 27 Marines, some of them barely 18 years old, some of them calling for their mothers as their blood pressure dropped and their vision faded. They were good Marines, she said. They deserved to come home. The satellite imagery on the screen flickered as someone adjusted the projector, but no one seemed to notice. All attention remained fixed on the woman in the flight suit, the pilot who'd become mythology without meaning to. Kestrel had tried to leave that reputation behind when she transferred to the Pentagon, tried to become just another staff officer pushing papers and attending meetings. But legends, she was learning, had a way of following you. The serpent's back, Colonel Martinez said, returning to the tactical display. You really think it's viable? Kestrel moved closer to the screen, her finger tracing the contour lines. The valley system creates a natural radar shadow. Approach from the northeast, follow the creek bed for the first 12 miles, then pop up behind this ridgeline. Her finger traced a path that looked suicidal to untrained eyes, but elegant to those who understood the science of terrain masking. Altitude? Asked Lieutenant Colonel Park. 50 feet, maybe less in some sections. A collective intake of breath swept the room. 50 feet was nothing in a fighter jet traveling at 500 knots. At that altitude, a single mistake, a moment's inattention, would result in a smoking crater and a folded flag presentation to grieving families. Ma'am, Captain Reynolds said, his voice carefully respectful now. With respect, that's beyond the envelope for most pilots. Kestrel turned to look at him. Her gray eyes held depths that spoke of countless hours in cockpits, of decisions made in microseconds while death reached out with eager fingers. Most pilots weren't at Blackwater. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Everyone knew the stories now, the whispered accounts that filtered through military channels. How Ghostwriter had flown missions that existed only in classified files. How she brought home pilots and soldiers and Marines when everyone else said it was impossible. Colonel Martinez studied the topographical map for a long moment. How many aircraft? 4, Kestrel replied without hesitation. 2 ship elements, staggered approach. First element takes out the northern SAM sites. Second element handles the southern positions. Clean, precise, simultaneous strikes. And if something goes wrong, if the weather turns or if they detect our approach? Kestrel's expression didn't change. Then we adapt, that's what we do. The room buzzed with quiet conversations as officers processed the implications. This wasn't just another strike mission. This was threading a needle at 500 miles per hour, with the lives of 4 pilots and the success of the entire operation hanging in the balance. But they were looking at Ghostwriter, and somehow that made the impossible seem merely difficult. Major Thompson pulled up weather forecasts on his tablet. Visibility looks good for the next 72 hours. Wind patterns are favorable. He paused, studying the data. Ma'am, who would you recommend to fly this mission? The question hung in the air like smoke. Everyone in the room knew what he was really asking. Would the legendary Ghostwriter come out of her Pentagon exile to fly one more impossible mission? Kestrel looked around the table, studying faces, reading expressions. These were good officers, competent pilots, but competence wasn't enough for what she was proposing. This mission required something more. the kind of precision that came from dancing with death so often that you learned to anticipate its moves. "I'll need pilots who understand mountain flying," she said carefully, "who know the difference between calculated risk and suicide." "Ma'am," Colonel Martinez interjected, "are you volunteering to lead this mission?" 23 officers held their breath. Outside, another flight of F-35s roared past, their turbine whine a reminder of the urgency that drove every decision in this room. Somewhere across the ocean, enemy forces were digging in, strengthening their positions, preparing for an assault they believed would never come. Kestrel was quiet for a long moment. She thought about her Pentagon office, her comfortable staff position, her carefully ordered life that kept her safely removed from the sharp edge of combat. She thought about the nightmares that still visited her on quiet nights, dreams filled with rotor wash and tracer fire, and the voices of young Marines calling her name. Then she thought about the mission, about pilots who might not come home if someone else tried to thread this particular needle. "Yes," she said simply, "I'll lead it." The transformation in the room was immediate and electric. Suddenly, this wasn't just another planning session for another strike mission. This was watching a legend step back into the arena. Officers straightened in their chairs, pulled out notebooks, prepared to document every detail of what Ghostwriter was about to propose. Captain Reynolds cleared his throat. "Ma'am, what aircraft?" "FA-18F Super Hornets. The terrain clearance requirements rule out everything else." Kestrel moved to the tactical display, her finger tracing flight paths with the confidence of someone who'd visualized this mission 100 times in the past 5 minutes. "We'll need conformal fuel tanks for range, precision, guided munitions for the SAM sites." "Electronic warfare support?" asked Major Thompson. "Negative. Birds can't follow us through the terrain. We'll be too low, too fast. This is old-school flying." She paused, studying the faces around her. Visual navigation, dead reckoning, human eyeballs, and reaction time. Lieutenant Colonel Park frowned at his intelligence briefing. "Ma'am, these SAM sites are heavily defended. AAA, MA, and PADS, probably some short-range interceptor missiles. Even if you reach the target area undetected, the moment you pop up to attack—" "6 seconds," Kestrel interrupted. "That's how long we'll be exposed. Pop up, acquire fire, dive back into the terrain masking. The missiles will be in the air before they know we're there." "And egress?" "Different route, southwest through the Khyber Gorge, then over water." Her finger traced a path that looked even more dangerous than the ingress route. "Speed is life. We go in fast, hit hard, get out faster." Colonel Martinez was making notes on his tablet, already drafting the operational order. Timeline: 48 hours. I'll need time to brief the other pilots, study the terrain data, coordinate with intelligence. Kestrel paused, looking around the room. "And I'll need volunteers. Nobody gets assigned to this mission. Everyone flies because they choose to." The silence that followed was profound. This was the moment where theoretical planning became personal commitment, where staff officers had to decide if they were willing to trust their lives to a legend, and a plan that violated every safe flying principle they'd ever learned. Captain Reynolds was the first to speak. "Ma'am, I volunteer." Lieutenant Murphy, a quiet pilot from the 47th Fighter Squadron, nodded. "Count me in." One by one, voices around the room spoke up. Within minutes, Kestrel had more volunteers than she could use. The legend of Ghostwriter carried weight, but more than that, these officers understood what was at stake. Failure here meant the entire operation collapsed. Success meant saving hundreds of lives. Colonel Martinez stood. "Major Voss, the mission is yours. You have full operational authority and complete resource allocation." He paused, studying her face. "Bring them home, Ghostwriter." Kestrel nodded. "Always do, sir." As the briefing broke up and officers filed out to their respective preparations, Kestrel remained behind, studying the satellite imagery with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining X-rays. The serpent's back stretched across the screen, a geological formation that would either hide her strike force or become their tomb. Her fingers traced the contour lines, calculating approach angles and egress routes with the unconscious precision of someone who thought in 3 dimensions. 50 feet above ground level. 500 knots indicated airspeed. 4 aircraft carrying enough ordnance to level a city block, threading their way through mountains that rose 8,000 feet on either side. Major Thompson approached quietly. "Ma'am, I pulled the pilot records for the volunteers. Reynolds has mountain flying experience from Alaska. Murphy trained in the Rockies. Jacobs did a tour in Afghanistan." He handed her a tablet loaded with personnel files. "All good pilots." "Good isn't enough," Kestrel replied, not looking up from the maps. "I need pilots who understand that there's no margin for error, no second chances, no bailout options once we commit to the approach." "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking," Thompson hesitated, "the mission at Blackwater, the one everyone talks about, what was it really like?" Kestrel was quiet for a long moment, her gray eyes distant. Outside, the afternoon sun slanted through the briefing room windows, painting everything in golden light. Somewhere in the building, a printer hummed to life, producing operational orders and flight plans and intelligence reports. The ordinary sounds of military planning, preparing for extraordinary events. "Terrifying," she said finally. "Every second of it, but that's not what mattered." "What did matter?" She looked up at him then, and Thompson saw something in her expression that made him understand why junior officers followed Ghost Rider into situations that should have been impossible. "The Marines mattered," she said. "Everything else was just flying." 24 hours later, Kestrel stood on the flight line watching ground crews perform final preparations on 4 FA-18F Super Hornets. The aircraft gleamed under the afternoon sun, their gray paint schemes designed to blend with storm clouds and mountain shadows. Each Hornet carried a full load of precision-guided munitions, AGM-88 HARM missiles for the radar sites, Mark 82 bombs for the hardened positions. Captain Reynolds approached, his flight gear draped over one arm. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you for selecting me for this mission." Kestrel adjusted her G-suit connections, the familiar ritual of preparing for combat. "Don't thank me yet, Reynolds. Ask me again after we're back on the ground." "Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying so, I was wrong about you. Earlier in the briefing, I thought—" He struggled for words. "You thought I was just another Pentagon desk jockey who'd forgotten how to fly." Kestrel's tone carried no accusation, just statement of fact. "It's understandable. Most staff officers lose their edge after a few years behind a desk. But not you." She looked at him then, studying his face. Reynolds was young, maybe 26, with the confident bearing that came from graduating at the top of his flight training class. But confidence could be dangerous in the mountains. Overconfidence was usually fatal. "Listen carefully," she said. "Once we enter that valley system, there are no takebacks, no go-arounds, no emergency procedures except to keep flying and pray the airplane holds together. The terrain will kill you faster than enemy fire. The mountains don't care about your training scores or your ego. They only care about physics." Reynolds nodded soberly. "Understood, ma'am." "Good, because I need you focused, not starstruck. The legend of Ghost Rider doesn't make the airplane fly. Only skill and judgment do that." Lieutenant Murphy joined them, her own flight gear ready. At 28, she was slightly older than Reynolds, with the steady composure that marked natural pilots. "Ma'am, I reviewed the terrain data. The approach corridor is tight, but manageable if we maintain precise formation discipline." "Formation discipline," Kestrel repeated. "That's the key. We go in as a unit, we strike as a unit, we come home as a unit. Nobody breaks off, nobody improvises, nobody tries to be a hero." Captain Jacobs, the fourth pilot, approached with his helmet tucked under his arm. Ma'am, intelligence reports possible patrol aircraft in the target area. MiG-29s based out of Krasnov Field. Kestrel had already reviewed the intelligence briefing. Enemy fighters were always a concern, but in this case, they might actually work to their advantage. The MiGs are looking for high-altitude threats. We'll be so low they won't even see us on radar until we're already engaging the SAM sites. And after we unmask, we'll have about 30 seconds before they can vector interceptors to our position. More than enough time to complete the attack and disappear back into the terrain. She paused, looking at each of her pilots in turn. Any other questions? Murphy raised her hand. Ma'am, rules of engagement. Simple, anything that shoots at us dies, everything else we ignore. Kestrel pulled on her flight gloves, the worn leather molding to her hands like old friends. This isn't a police action. This isn't nation building. This is about eliminating a specific threat so that other people can complete their missions. The four pilots walked toward their aircraft, their boots clicking against the concrete flight line. Ground crews snapped to attention as they approached, the traditional respect accorded to those about to place their lives in the hands of physics and probability. Kestrel's Hornet bore the tail number 307, her lucky number from a dozen previous assignments. She'd flown this exact aircraft on 2 previous combat deployments, knew its quirks and characteristics like a musician knows a favorite instrument. The control stick had a slight play in the roll axis. The heads-up display was perfectly calibrated. The ejection seat was precisely adjusted to her height and weight. Her crew chief, Staff Sergeant Morrison, waited beside the aircraft. Ma'am, she's ready to go. All systems green, weapons hot, fuel load maximum. Any maintenance issues? Negative, ma'am. This bird's as ready as she's ever been. Morrison paused, his expression serious. Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying so, it's an honor to crew for Ghost Rider. Kestrel accepted her helmet from Morrison, the familiar weight settling over her head like armor. Just keep her flying, Sergeant. Everything else is up to me. She climbed the ladder into the cockpit, her movements automatic after thousands of hours of repetition. Straps, connections, switches, displays. The Hornet came alive around her, instruments glowing, computers cycling through startup sequences, engines spooling up with their characteristic whine. Over the radio, she heard her wingmen completing their own pre-flight preparations. Reynolds in aircraft 312, Murphy in 318, Jacobs in 325. 4 pilots, 4 machines, preparing to thread the needle between life and death. Ghost Rider flight check-in, she transmitted. 2, 3, 4. The voices were calm, professional, betraying no hint of the tension that must be building in every cockpit. These were good pilots, Kestrel realized. Maybe good enough to survive what she was about to ask them to do. Tower Ghost Rider flight, ready for departure. Ghost Rider flight, wind 270 at 15, altimeter 3002, you are cleared for takeoff. Good hunting. The 4 Super Hornets rolled down the runway in formation, their afterburners painting orange flames against the evening sky. As they lifted off into the gathering dusk, Kestrel felt the familiar transformation that occurred every time she left the ground. On the surface, she was Major Kestrel Voss, staff officer and Pentagon bureaucrat. But up here, surrounded by instruments and displays and the infinite sky, she was Ghost Rider. And Ghost Rider had work to do. The flight to the target area passed in professional silence, 4 aircraft maintaining perfect formation as they crossed international boundaries and entered hostile airspace. Below them, the landscape gradually transformed from rolling hills to sharp mountain peaks, the terrain becoming increasingly unforgiving with each mile. Kestrel monitored her displays, watching altitude, airspeed, fuel consumption, weapons status. Everything appeared normal, but she knew that normal could change to catastrophic in the span of a heartbeat. That was the nature of combat flying. long periods of routine punctuated by moments of absolute terror. Ghost Rider flight, turn left heading 045, she transmitted. Descent to 500 feet. The formation banked left, following her lead as they approached the entrance to the Serpent's Back. Below them, the valley mouth yawned like the entrance to another world, walls of stone rising thousands of feet on either side. Ghost Rider flight switched to tactical frequency, Kestrel transmitted. The radio crackled as all 4 aircraft changed to the secure channel that would carry them through the next phase of the mission. Flight, this is lead. From this point forward, maintain radio discipline. Acknowledge. 3 quick clicks answered her, the universal signal for understood and acknowledged. Words were dangerous now. Every transmission was another chance for enemy electronic warfare systems to triangulate their position. Kestrel pushed the stick forward, leading her flight into the valley. The walls closed in around them, stone faces scarred by wind and weather, ancient beyond human memory. At 300 feet above ground level, traveling at 400 knots, the margin for error shrank to nothing. Her eyes moved constantly between the heads-up display and the terrain ahead, calculating angles and clearances with the unconscious precision of a master craftsman. Left stick, right rudder, adjusting for the wind that swirled between the canyon walls. Behind her, 3 pilots matched her every movement, their aircraft dancing through the confined space like a precision aerobatic team. The first turn approached, a hard right that required a 60-degree bank at minimum altitude. Kestrel rolled the Hornet onto its wing tip, feeling the G-forces press her deep into the ejection seat. The canyon wall flashed past her wingtip, close enough to see individual rocks and crevices. Jesus, someone muttered over the radio. The transmission cut short as discipline reasserted itself. They were committed now. Too low to climb over the mountains, too confined to turn around, moving too fast to stop. The only way out was forward, through terrain that could crush them without warning or regret. Kestrel felt the familiar calm that descended during moments of absolute focus. Her breathing steadied, her heart rate slowed, her vision sharpened until she could see every detail of the landscape rushing past. This was what she lived for, the moment when training and instinct merged into something approaching art. The valley curved left, then right again, following the ancient path carved by water and time. Each turn brought new challenges, new calculations, new opportunities for disaster, but also new confirmation that her plan was working. They were invisible down here, hidden in the radar shadow of the mountains, approaching their targets undetected. 10 miles from the target area, Kestrel began climbing gradually, bringing the formation up to 500 feet above ground level. Still dangerously low, but high enough to acquire their targets and engage with precision weapons. Ghost Rider flight, weapons hot, she transmitted. Target area in 2 minutes. 3 clicks acknowledged the transmission. 4 aircraft, 8 missiles, 16 bombs. Enough firepower to eliminate the SAM sites and clear the way for the main assault, if everything went according to plan. But plans, Kestrel knew, rarely survived contact with reality. That's when training took over. That's when legends were born. The valley opened into a broader basin, and suddenly the target area spread below them like a tactical display come to life. 3 SAM sites arranged in a triangle, exactly as intelligence had predicted. Radar dishes rotating slowly, searching the sky for threats they couldn't imagine. Ghost Rider flight, target in sight, Kestrel transmitted. Elements split as briefed. Engage on my mark. The formation separated. Reynolds and Murphy banking left toward the northern SAM sites, while Kestrel and Jacobs continued toward the southern positions. The precision of the maneuver was beautiful to watch. 4 aircraft moving in perfect coordination, each pilot executing their assigned role with mechanical precision. Kestrel selected her first target, the largest radar installation visible on the hillside below. The targeting computer painted a green diamond on her heads-up display, indicating lock-on. Range decreasing, angle optimal, weapons ready. Ghost Rider flight mark, she transmitted. 8 missiles streaked from their launch rails simultaneously, white contrails painting lines across the morning sky. The AGM-88 HARM missiles were designed specifically for this mission, detecting and destroying radar installations with surgical precision. The first explosions bloomed like deadly flowers across the mountainside. Radar dishes disintegrated, control buildings collapsed, secondary explosions rocked ammunition storage areas. In the span of 6 seconds, a sophisticated air defense network simply ceased to exist. Ghost Rider flight target destroyed, Kestrel transmitted. Egress as briefed. But even as she spoke, her threat warning display lit up with new contacts. Someone had survived the initial attack. Someone was shooting back. Surface-to-air missiles began launching from hidden positions, their smoke trails reaching upward like accusing fingers. The enemy had been more prepared than intelligence indicated. The mission was about to become very interesting. Ghost Rider flight, missile launch, break, Kestrel transmitted, her voice calm despite the deadly situation developing around them. 4 Super Hornets scattered like startled birds, each pilot initiating defensive maneuvers designed to break radar lock and confuse incoming missiles. Chaff and flares bloomed in their wake, creating false targets for heat-seeking and radar-guided weapons. Kestrel rolled, inverted, and pulled toward the deck, using the terrain to mask her aircraft from enemy sensors. Behind her, she could hear the distinctive whistle of missiles passing close enough to kill, their proximity fuses searching for metal and heat signatures. "Lead, this is 3, Murphy's voice crackled over the radio. "I'm tracking multiple launches from the eastern ridge. Looks like mobile SAMs, not fixed installations." "Copy 3. All aircraft, maintain terrain masking and egress through the southern corridor." Kestrel checked her fuel and weapons status. Plenty of gas for the flight home, but her missile load was expended. If they encountered enemy fighters now, they'd be fighting with cannon only. "Lead, this is 4, Jacobs transmitted. "I'm showing battle damage, hydraulic pressure dropping, flight controls getting mushy." Kestrel felt her stomach tighten. Battle damage on egress was every flight leader's nightmare. Jacobs was flying a wounded aircraft through terrain that offered no room for emergency procedures. 4, can you maintain formation? "Affirmative for now, but I don't know how long. Controls are getting heavier." The southern corridor stretched ahead of them, a narrow valley that would carry them back to international airspace and safety. But it was another 15 minutes of low-level flying, another 15 minutes of threading the needle between stone walls that could crush an aircraft without warning. "Ghost Rider flight, maintain formation discipline," Kestrel transmitted. "We stay together." It was more than operational necessity. It was the code that governed everything she did as a pilot and a leader. Nobody got left behind. Nobody flew home alone. They'd entered this valley as a team, and they'd leave as a team. The egress route proved even more challenging than the approach. The southern corridor was narrower, with sharper turns and less room for error. And now they were flying with a damaged aircraft whose pilot was fighting increasingly unresponsive controls with every mile. "Lead, this is 4. I'm losing hydraulic pressure fast. Controls are barely responding." Kestrel made a decision that would have horrified safety officers and pleased combat veterans. 4, this is Lead. I'm moving to close formation on your left wing. Use me as a reference for navigation. She slid her Hornet within 20 feet of Jacob's damaged aircraft, close enough to see his helmet moving as he fought the unresponsive controls. It was dangerous flying under any circumstances. In a narrow mountain valley, it bordered on suicidal. But it worked. With Kestrel flying formation on his wing, Jacobs could focus on keeping his aircraft level and stable while she handled navigation and communication. Two pilots, two aircraft, working together to solve a problem that would have been impossible for either one alone. The valley walls gradually spread apart as they approached international airspace. Below them, the terrain began to flatten into rolling hills and cultivated fields. Safety was just minutes away. Ghost Rider flight, feet wet, Kestrel transmitted as they crossed the border, the traditional call indicating they'd left hostile territory behind. But they weren't safe yet. Jacob's aircraft was still losing hydraulic fluid, still becoming more difficult to control with each passing minute. "Tower, this is Ghost Rider lead," Kestrel transmitted on the emergency frequency. "Declaring emergency for Ghost Rider 4. Battle damage, hydraulic failure, request priority handling." Ghost Rider lead, Tower copies emergency. "Runway is clear, emergency equipment standing by. Wind is calm, altimeter 3005. The field appeared ahead of them, a welcome rectangle of concrete surrounded by emergency vehicles with flashing lights. Kestrel maintained formation on Jacob's wing as they entered the traffic pattern, ready to provide guidance if his controls failed completely. "4, you're looking good," she transmitted. "Take it easy on final, don't force anything." Jacob's landing was textbook perfect despite his aircraft's condition. The Hornet touched down smoothly, rolled straight down the center line, and came to a stop surrounded by fire trucks and ambulances. Emergency crews swarmed the aircraft, but Jacobs climbed out under his own power, helmet tucked under his arm, grinning despite the close call. One by one, the other Super Hornets landed and taxied to their parking spots. Ground crews and maintenance personnel rushed to secure the aircraft and begin post-flight inspections. The mission was over. The threat was eliminated. Everyone had come home. Colonel Martinez was waiting as Kestrel shut down her engines and climbed out of the cockpit. His expression combined relief with professional satisfaction, the kind of look that said the mission had succeeded beyond expectations. "Ghost Rider," he said simply, "outstanding work." Kestrel removed her helmet, her gray hair damp with perspiration. Around them, the flight line buzzed with activity as crews secured aircraft and downloaded mission data, the ordinary aftermath of an extraordinary operation. "Thank you, sir, but it was a team effort. Reynolds, Murphy, and Jacobs performed exactly as briefed." "I'll make sure that goes in their records." Martinez paused, studying her face. "Major, I've been authorized to offer you a return to operational flying status. Full squadron command, immediate promotion to lieutenant colonel." The offer hung in the air between them. A return to the life she'd left behind, the world of daily flights and combat readiness and the constant presence of danger. Everything she'd walked away from when she accepted the Pentagon assignment. Kestrel looked across the flight line at her pilots, who were conducting their own post-flight debriefings with animated gestures and relieved laughter. They'd followed her into terrain that should have been impossible, trusted her judgment in situations where trust was literally a matter of life and death. "Sir, I appreciate the offer," she said finally, "but I think my Pentagon assignment still has value. There are other missions that need planning, other pilots who need guidance." Martinez nodded, understanding in his expression. "The offer stands, Major, anytime you change your mind." As he walked away, Kestrel remained on the flight line, watching the sun set behind the mountains they'd flown through just hours earlier. The peaks looked peaceful in the evening light, giving no hint of the dangers they concealed or the drama they'd witnessed. Her call sign would be remembered, she knew. Ghost Rider would become another entry in the unofficial history that pilots shared in ready rooms and officers' clubs. The legend would grow with each telling, becoming larger and more dramatic until it bore little resemblance to the actual mission. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that 4 pilots had come home safe. What mattered was that the main assault could proceed as planned, that other soldiers and Marines would have air cover when they needed it most. What mattered was that the legend of Ghost Rider wasn't about individual heroics or impossible missions. It was about competence, leadership, and the simple promise that everyone who followed her into the sky would come home again. That was enough. That had always been enough. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Kestrel walked toward the operations building to begin writing her after-action report. There would be other briefings, other missions, other opportunities to prove that legends were made not from mythology but from skill, preparation, and the unwavering commitment to bring everyone home. The fluorescent lights in the debriefing room hummed with the same frequency they'd hummed that morning, but everything else had changed. The satellite imagery that had seemed so threatening 12 hours earlier now showed smoking craters where sophisticated weapons systems had once threatened Allied aircraft. Captain Reynolds looked different too. The cocky confidence had been replaced by something deeper, respect earned through shared danger and professional competence witnessed firsthand. "Ma'am," he said as Kestrel entered the room, "I wanted to say thank you. For the mission, for the leadership, for bringing us all home." "Thank you for trusting the plan," she replied, "and for flying it exactly as briefed." Lieutenant Murphy nodded agreement. "Ma'am, that approach through the Serpent's back. I've never flown anything like it. The precision required, the navigation, the timing." She shook her head in amazement. It was like watching someone play a complex piece of music. "Captain Jack,"